Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this final press conference of the CPA International Observer Mission. It's been a very enjoyable, very busy, and a most interesting week for us, and I think everyone in Cayman. Can I introduce my colleagues in the team once again? On my right, the Honourable Akila Nisbet, who is from St. Kitts, Ojul Wilson from Anguilla, Anne Marlborough, who's an election analyst from Ireland, Armin Rabic, who is from Austria, election analyst, and Mariam El Azam, who is based at CPA headquarters in London and who is the mission coordinator. Well, I'm pleased to say that in our view, the 2017 general election in the Cayman Islands amply met the international standards for democratic, genuine and transparent elections, and the results do truly reflect the will of the people. I'd like to commend the people of Cayman for the way these elections were conducted, especially given the challenge of implementing new electoral boundaries under a new system of one person, one vote. We were very impressed by the high standard of organisation, meticulous attention to detail, and commitment of the Supervisor of Elections and his staff, both in the period before and during polling day itself. The peaceful electoral process allowed different opinions to be expressed freely, and the high voter turnout and enthusiastic participation of Caymanian people demonstrated their high commitment to the principles of democracy. So in short, we are confident that the people of the Cayman Islands, whether pleased with the election result or not, can have confidence in the administration of the elections themselves and the ultimate outcome on polling day. Now, the legal framework provides the basis for the conduct of elections, and this is in line with the international legal principles and commitments which apply to the Cayman Islands. There was broad compliance with the requirements for the protection of human rights throughout the electoral process. The political freedoms of expression, association, assembly, and movement were well respected. The Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands consists, as you know, of 21 members, 19 of whom are directly elected. While the report of the Boundary Commission 2015 and the Elections Amendment Law 2016 have made real progress towards equality of the vote, there are still a few instances in which districts depart from the norm which otherwise prevails across Grand Cayman. The districts of North Side with 716 registered voters and East End with 692 depart from the average of 1,186 voters in the other 17 Grand Cayman districts. So we make that observation. The Elections Office has been highly praised, rightly, by all electoral stakeholders for the manner in which the election was administered, and their officials enjoyed the confidence of the public and of the political parties. Qualifications for voter registration include the attainment of 18 years of age as well as residency in the Cayman Islands for at least 2 of the 4 years immediately preceding the date of registration. This period appears to us to be overly restrictive and may operate to exclude otherwise eligible Caymanians from exercising their right to vote. The Constitution Order 2009 sets out the eligibility requirements to stand for election to the Legislative Assembly. While to a large extent these requirements are reasonable, some of them, namely the required durations of residence in the Cayman Islands prior to nomination, appear to impose unreasonable limits on the right to stand for elected office. Eligibility for election may be denied where an individual is a holder of dual citizenship or is under any acknowledgement of adherence or allegiance to a foreign power. The Grand Court has adjudicated upon these provisions in several cases, providing some interpretation of the legal rules. But the judgments are complex, with the result that it is difficult to predict with certainty how the eligibility status of any aspiring candidate would be evaluated. A total of 61 candidates contested 19 seats in the Legislative Assembly. 16 women stood for election, which at 26% represented the highest proportion of female candidates participating in an election to date, and this is most welcome. However, only 3 amongst them were elected, comprising less than 16% of the elected members of the Legislative Assembly, with the result that this actually falls short of realising the commitments for equality for women which are set out in international women's conventions. The transparency of campaign finances was limited, as there are no requirements for contestants to submit or for the authorities to audit and publish reports on expenditure before polling day. In the absence of public funding for either parties or candidates, some of our mission members expressed concern that some of those who spoke with us expressed concern that the amount of funding from private Caymanians was too high and distorted the fairness of the campaign. While candidates must deliver statements of all expenditure and donations to the supervisor of elections, there is actually no obligation on any state institution, in fact, to verify the completeness and accuracy of the expenses and contributions declared. Higher accounting and oversight standards have been created under the Standards in Public Life Law, which, though passed by members of the Legislative Assembly in 2014, have in fact yet to be implemented, as the legislation has not commenced to date. There was no provision of free airtime to candidates, but public radio was reported, and what we have observed has covered candidates fairly and equally. Those candidates we met did comment on the immense increase in advertising rates in the media during the campaign period, which allegedly took advantage of the limited media space available, paired with the high demand. The private media reportedly provided airtime and space to all candidates on an equal first-come, first-served basis. On polling day itself, 25th of May, members of the Election Observation Mission visited all 19 electoral districts, including almost all of the 57 polling stations across the Cayman Islands. The overall conduct of the opening, voting and closing procedures was assessed by the observers as very good in all instances. Procedures were followed to the letter of the law with meticulous attention to detail. There was clear evidence that extensive staff training had taken place, which was obvious to us in the efficient discharge by staff of their duties. The ballot paper new for this election was of high quality, including colour photographs of candidates and their logos, as well as the list of names in alphabetical order. There were very few spoiled ballot papers. The voter turnout was 15,721, amounting to 74.06% of registered voters. Votes were counted in 25 counting stations, that being 1 or 2 per electoral district. Counting procedures were followed impeccably in the 3 stations observed by the mission. Candidate agents were present throughout the process, which was conducted efficiently. All results were officially declared before midnight on polling day. So, once again, a well-administered process that reflects the will of the people. And again, we would say that we are confident that the people of Cayman, whether pleased with the actual results or not, can certainly have confidence in the administration process of the elections and the veracity of the ultimate outcome on Wednesday. Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Akila if she would like to say a few words.
Sure, thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me start by just thanking the people of the Cayman Islands for their hospitality. You were indeed warm and welcoming, and you were very helpful and respectful in our duties as we went through on polling day, and we're very thankful for that. I would like to commend the supervisor of election and his staff on a very well planned and executed electoral process. Considering the time given for them to plan and execute under this new one man, one vote, single member district electoral system, I do believe that they were able to do that effectively. And so I would like again to say that I commend them for their efforts. There are some areas that we would be presenting in our report, which we won't be speaking about today, where are areas of recommendations for going forward with this new electoral system. However, I would like to say that there are also areas which I found to be extremely highly efficient and for which I will be taking back to St. Kitts and Nevis with me. As you know, St. Kitts and Nevis have conducted our electoral process under the single member electoral system from since we started having elections in St. Kitts and Nevis. So it's nothing new to St. Kitts and Nevis. However, there are areas that I do believe we can adopt from the Cayman Islands, and I would like again to commend the electoral office for a job well done. I can understand the hesitation of the people of the Cayman Islands with this new system. Of course, anything new or require change, there's some learning process involved. But I am confident that with the work of the electoral office, that in time, persons will be able to be educated on this new system and thus be able to be confident that they can move forward with such a process. And of course, the proof is in the execution of this new under the Legislative Assembly and the government and the functioning of such under this new system. Being a female politician, however, I would also like to commend the number of women who have participated in the electoral process and electoral system here in the Cayman Islands. It speaks volumes of where women are heading, not just in the Cayman Islands, but in the entire region as a whole. And so I would just like to commend, not being sexist, I'm just commending the women who have been involved. And once again, allow me to just commend the electoral office, the supervisor of election and his staff on a job well done, and to the people of the Cayman Islands for all their hospitality and all of your assistance for the time that we were here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite questions, and between us we'll do our best to answer them.
Mr. Rodan, this is Brent from Compass again. Hello. Is there a concern that you all have, or is this still to be discussed in the report, about whether potential voters are being disenfranchised by the 2 out of 4 years rule? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to discern is how bad of a problem is that? I mean, is that a serious concern, or is... How would you just qualify that?
Yes, it has been brought to us directly by one individual, and we understand that the concern is shared by a number of individuals, the requirement to be resident for at least 2 of the past 4 years before registration is allowed. This does seem to us unreasonable and unnecessarily restrictive, in that when Caymanians go to work abroad, they are otherwise entitled to vote. They're Caymanian at age 18 and over, come back to have to live and have to wait for 2 years before they, in effect, can exercise the right to vote again. Certainly seems restrictive. Just to give you my own example that I'm familiar with, in the Isle of Man, where the voting age is actually 16, 12 months residence is required in the Isle of Man.
I was going to ask that, sir, if we could, just one more. Is it anywhere else in the Commonwealth that you know of that they have to wait 2 years for residents to vote? Does that exist anywhere else?
I'm not aware, which is not to say it doesn't happen, but it certainly would appear to be not within the international norm. It's not the situation that prevails in St. Kitts, for example, or Anguilla either. And it's something I think that could be very usefully looked at. You have to be on the register, registered as a voter at a certain address to vote. That's fine. If you move away, you're no longer registered at that address, and the next time registration comes round, you're dropped off the list. It would probably be very helpful to people if the election supervisor were to advise people if they were being removed from the list. But the onus is on the individual to register, and if they're physically living and physically present in Cayman, they have the right to register. If the complaint is the issue that having registered once, you then have an enduring right to vote in the Cayman Islands, no matter where you lived, even if you've moved away, that is a different issue. In the UK, for example, the right to vote is given to citizens who live abroad for a period of up to 15 years. They can apply to be treated as a voter at their last registered UK address. Similar situation, United States and France, which is which Mariam is familiar with. It is up to the people of Cayman and the Cayman government whether they want to take that particular step. But that is a different issue. This one of an enduring right to vote once you've moved away. But having moved away and you want to come back and live here, should you have to wait 2 years before you join the register again? Personally, I don't think so.
Ralph Lewis, 2 questions. The first one is, you've classified the turnout as high, even though it was 4% less than the previous elections. Do you still consider it high? And is it relatively high in regards to the regional results for other elections?
Yes. The 74% turnout was a few percent down, I think. Armin, it was 78% at the last election. But we must remember that there are 3,000 more people on the register, and in fact, the highest number of people ever voting in Cayman was at this election. There were some
1,000 more voters.
1,000 more voters than last time. So looked at in that perspective, it's a success story, both for getting people registered and despite the slight fall in turnout, for which there may be various reasons, it's a very, very good turnout. Certainly better turnout than where I come from. So I think it's to be commended. reasons for the fall in turnout. People would have opinions, and perhaps not being familiar with the new one person, one vote system and the new boundaries, although extensive efforts we note were made to have people understand where they actually could vote. This is one of the areas of detail. We'll comment more in the full report with recommendations as to how you might get people to be fully aware of where they must go to vote. There are various ways of being able to do that. The fact that people having been used to 4 votes or 6 votes now only having 1, did that deter people from coming out to vote? One can speculate. 1 or 2 people have mentioned that to us, but there may be other reasons for the drop in turnout.
Thank you. And the second question was the one I asked previously regarding the size of the constituents. Average 1,200. What are your views on the size of constituents? In these circumstances, I consider it fairly small. And in a small island where everyone knows everyone, I do believe that the results can be reflected differently if there were larger numbers in the constituents.
Yes.
What are your views on that, if you can comment?
Well, I have no views, really. It's for the government and the people to decide what's appropriate, but the decision was to go to single-member seats. They are of a reasonable size, given the overall size of the community. I would have thought, I've already mentioned the anomaly, apart from the constitutional recognition of Little Cayman and Cayman Brac as being separate. One obviously has to note East End and North Side as being significantly below the average size. We understand there was much debate around that situation at the time, and it is for the authorities here to address this. We simply observe that there is this discrepancy, but we note also the important principle that has been adopted, that everyone has an equality of votes. Everyone now has the same number of votes, i.e. 1 vote, and therefore someone cannot have 4 times or 6 times the degree of representation in the House of Assembly than anyone else. So an important move forward has been made. I don't know if you have any comment. Okay.
Hello, Wendy from Cayman News Service. I just want to follow up on the questions that we did ask at the last press briefing, which was about these residency issues, which referred to the voters and the candidates. Because the recommendations were made in the last mission, you said you were going to follow up and see how far any advances, changes. So can you tell us what you learned about that? Like, is there something happening? Were you impressed with that, or feel that there's more work to be done? What was your position on how we're addressing it?
Well, yes. In our last mission, we highlighted this restriction as being unreasonable, and it's unreasonable in terms of international norms and conventions. It is a fact. No progress appears to have been made in changing the situation, so it would remain our position that if people are not to be unreasonably disenfranchised, this really should be looked at by the authorities.
But what kind of response did you get? I mean, what were you told about that? Can you share any of that with us? Because these are questions that we've been asking as well, and we haven't really sort of got very far on. I mean, what did you learn about what has happened, if anything at all, or if it hasn't, were they willing to tell you why it hasn't?
Yes. The situation in respect, of course, of candidates, and that has been, in the interim period, subject to legal judgment, and that complex legal situation prevails, and there is a lack of clarity and uncertainty as to people being qualified to stand as candidates. That was acknowledged by some of those with whom we had discussion. As far as the situation with voter registration is concerned, it's a fit. We were not able to understand why no particular progress has been made, given that other than the possibility of pressure and legislative time, other changes having come in, there was an acknowledgement that the situation was still giving some concern. Does that reflect?
It does, but I suppose also what we've been told is that this is a constitutional matter, so it's not something that can be rectified overnight. Yes. So all we can do is acknowledge, too, the change in the elections law, the amendment that was introduced which allowed for the pre-election reviews of the eligibility of candidates this time, in that, well, at least there was an opportunity to have some certainty in relation to individual candidates in advance of the election rather than waiting till post-election petitions. But that really doesn't change the substance of the law. It's only that there was a more expeditious interpretation of the law. So our comments on the law would not have changed at all.
Can I just also see maybe, I think it was you are the legal analyst, whoever the legal analysts are, that whether they... The complaint that's been made to the Human Rights Commission with regards to the fact that there could be at least 490-some people that have been disenfranchised simply because of this 2-year residency, and the argument of the in perpetuity that you're on the register and then all you have to do is simply update your details when they change as opposed to being pulled off. Because did you find that there was an arbitrary application of that? Because that was the other issue that's been raised by the complainant, that it's not just a matter of 500 people being disenfranchised. Some people who are not resident are actually on the register and have been allowed to vote. So there's an arbitrary application, and whether their legal argument of it is correct or not. Because if the register is updated every 3 months, the natural interpretation of that would be that we all have to re-register every 3 months, and that's kind of absurd. So, what's your feeling on the legal aspects, if you can say that or not?
We have no further comment on this in relation to individual cases. We have not looked at individual cases. We're only commenting on the broad legal framework. We haven't had the time, nor is it. We haven't had the opportunity to look into that.
About the arbitrary, did you have any feelings about that, the arbitrary nature of the application of the law?
I have no, I have not.
Okay. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Right. Reshma Raghunath, Cayman 27. My question revolves around the actual election day proceedings, and during the actual application of the elections, there were a lot of questions raised, some complaints of canvassing, billboards still being up. Did your team note these complaints, and have you had any, do you have any comments to make on that? Have you, noted these things in your report and your own recommendations on those instances?
Yes. Our observation was that the letter of the law had been rigidly stuck to, and election materials were down. We certainly observed none up that shouldn't have been up. There was nothing of that sort. People were respectful of the 300 feet exclusion zone around polling stations. That was respected. There was no activity that we observed going on in that regard. As to reports of materials still being up, there were certainly none brought to our attention. I'm not aware that the election supervisor has reported any of that to us when we asked him how things had gone. There may have been some minor incidents, but nothing of any significance that we are aware of. It seemed to be very well respected indeed.
Okay, just a follow to that question. There were some concerns raised about the actual billboards. Some of the billboards remained up, the frames were up, but were still painted in party colors. Is that something that is the norm, or would that be considered campaigning using the party color as opposed to whitewashing it instead, or something like that?
Well, we're not aware of any instances, and they would need to be looked at individually on their merits, which, as I say, we had not been given any reports of such, or therefore had the opportunity to look into these reports. But if they are valid, there is very good mechanism to have this sort of complaint investigated and dealt with, and are quite happy with the process for doing that. We are not in a position to say, and there's certainly no evidence that the system cannot cope with or address any potential ambiguities or problems of that sort.
Okay. You raised a point about campaign financing. It was a concern throughout the process as well as the campaign proceeded. Would you be able to share some of your recommendations, or what is needed to ensure that campaign financing, proper checks and balances are put in place to ensure that there is no unfair advantage in the electoral process?
Yes, we'll be commenting in detail on this in the final in our final recommendations. Well, one of the issues is the cut-off point by which the issue of the writ in December is that when the clock starts ticking for running up election expenses, and is there a mad rush before that to make certain expenditures which don't need to be cleared and show up in the account, accrual accounting. Now, I did make reference to the legal situation, the higher accounting standards that have been created under the Standards in Public Life law yet to be given effect. If that may be the vehicle to address matters of that sort.
Okay. You also noted the voter population in North Side and East End. That was also a concern that was registered. Are you recommending boundary changes to facilitate that parity among the single-member constituencies?
No, I don't think we'd be making recommendations. It wouldn't be our place to make a recommendation on actual boundaries. We would wish, however, to report on whether we believe there has been a broad equality of representation. And as I have said, we believe there is, with the exception of those, the North Side and the East End. But it is for us to highlight that situation, make the comment, and it's for the authorities here to take that up or not. There might well be, given that this was the first election under the new system, I'd be surprised if the election supervisor's office, when they assess how the elections have gone, didn't in fact look at the issue of boundaries. But of course that would need some legislative change, and that is for the Assembly itself to consider.
If I could just piggyback one in on that. If you all could explain, this has come up a lot, that why is it an issue that there are why is it a problem, if it is a problem, that there are so many fewer voters in East End and North Side than everywhere else? I'm just not getting why is that a difficulty? If you could just kind of explain why.
Well, I can't answer that. The situation was considered. Yeah,
yes. Under international law, particularly the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the provisions around elections entitle citizens to universal and equal suffrage. And equal suffrage has been interpreted as meaning that every vote should have an equal weight, as more as less as is practicable. And indeed, the Constitution here does say that too, with the exceptions of little Cayman, Cayman Brac, and as well some acknowledgement of traditional boundaries. But essentially, the principle is about fairness and equity. It's about how one is represented in Parliament. So, just in general, if one district has far fewer residents than another, it means that they have much higher per head representation in the Legislative Assembly. So if, for example, there's any policy decision being made, it means that the residents of the voters in the area which has a higher weight of representation will have an unequal voice in saying how resources should be divided or whatever it is. It's a principle under international human rights law that there ought to be equality of the franchise, which is equal weight for your vote as is possible. So a sort of 15-20% deviation from the average is considered acceptable, but more or less as close to parity as is practicable would be what we would expect under international law. So it's Article 25 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Does that answer your question?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes, I think I understood it to be why was this allowed to happen, and not for us to say. It's for the decision makers here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
we're finished.
I just have one more question.
One more question? Yes.
You talked about the inequality in terms of the gender's representation in the Parliament now that the votes have been cast, and you know out of the 16 female candidates, only 3 made it into the LA. Is there anything that can be done to ensure that there is more balanced representation in the LA? Your own take on that.
Well, the situation is not unique to Cayman, of course. Many jurisdictions seek to address this problem of inequality of representation by women. But there are all sorts of reasons given, the culture of the society, the ease with which people can put themselves forward as candidates, and different jurisdictions have different ways of dealing with it. Party quotas, for example, women-only candidates lists. It's not for us to recommend any solution other than to point out the international norms that jurisdictions strive to maintain. You clearly don't have the equality that is noted in other jurisdictions, but nor are you as far behind as some others might be. But we highlight the issue because it is one of the benchmarks against which we assess electoral practice, the ease with which women can stand as candidates and be elected, and it is for you to decide how, if you agree that that is a worthy aspiration, how it should be achieved. I think that concludes the question, so thank you very, very much indeed. And can I once again thank you for your interest, and thank all the people of Cayman for making our job such a pleasant task. Thank you very much.